I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Merci, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President. I'd like to express on behalf of my government and the people of Canada our deep sorrow at the events yesterday in Texas. You and your delegation and your country are very much in our thoughts and prayers. Je remercie.
I would like to thank the United States for having convened the open debate today, and I also thank the briefers for sharing with us their viewpoints. The Secretary General's report on the protection of civilians shows worrying trends. There are more conflicts today than since the Second World War. Forced displacement, hunger in the world, humanitarian needs are at the highest level we have seen for many years. And the violence against civilians and civilian infrastructures is growing and is becoming increasingly deadly.
Tragically, we're witnessing this daily in Ukraine, where there is still no end in sight to the horrors of what has been called the Russian war machine, the atrocity factory, as one scholar has called it. The Russian Federation's unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine has cast a glaring spotlight on two problems, clearly undermining the protection of civilians in armed conflict. First, the abuse of the veto power, and second, the glaring lack of accountability for violations of international law. We all know the first line of the UN Charter, but today, despite that promise to save succeeding generations, this generation is suffering from the scourge of war. And it is the civilian population, children, women, and men, who bear the brunt of armed conflict. That is why we have to look at the peace and security architecture of the UN, including the Security Council veto. The recent resolution adopted by the Assembly opens the door for greater and needed scrutiny of every veto, and will give all member states the chance to consider recommendations for collective measures instead of a blocked Security Council. When armed conflict does arise, the laws of war are uncontroversial. They protect those who are not or no longer taking part in hostilities, and they prohibit means and methods of warfare that cause unnecessary suffering. Were parties to armed conflict to scrupulously follow the law, we would not be here discussing humanitarian access, and most important, the vast majority of harm to civilians and civilian objects would be avoided. Yet we continue to witness these violations, whether it's Ukraine, Syria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, or Myanmar, and many others. Despite attacks, and I must say deliberate attacks, on hospitals, schools, homes, and essential infrastructure, they've now become all too familiar, carrying devastating effects for women and children, the disabled, those least able to take care of themselves in particular. Non-compliance and lack of accountability mean there's less space for humanitarian actors. Sometimes our instinct, Mr. Chairman, when we're faced with these horrors, is to do something, pass a resolution, create new laws. But I wonder if that's really the right approach. We think we have, first of all, to examine ourselves. What are we doing to make sure that international humanitarian law, the protocols and conventions that we've passed, are actually now built into our domestic laws, what we do nationally, what our practices really are. Second, we have to make sure that there is scrupulous adherence to international humanitarian law by our state and non-state partners. Third, where parties to armed conflict commit serious violations, we must hold them to account. First of all, diplomatically, through collective sanctions, militarily, by supporting governments, as in the case of Ukraine, that are defending themselves under Article 51 of the Charter, and legally through prosecution at the International Criminal Court, cases before the ICJ and other bodies.
Mr. President, our solidarity is our strength. We have to collectively build a structure which is a greater incentive for the respect of the international law and to strengthen the architecture we have for the protection of civilians, which the Council has been putting in place for 2 decades. In Ukraine, our solidarity shows through the unprecedented sanctions levied against the government of the Russian Federation and through the determination to hold their armed forces accountable for the glaring violations of international law. There should be no place in this world where the most serious violations of international law can be committed in full impunity.
Unprovoked and illegal actions in Ukraine shocked the conscience of mankind, but its horrific conduct has reinforced our collective will to defend the very international order that it is attempting to undermine. And we must use the same collective will to protect those who are suffering in conflicts around the world at the hands of too many whose actions, in flagrant violations of the rules of war and humanity, continue with little accountability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the representative of Canada for his statement.